This video is brought to you by TrevorBauer.com, the only place that you can get official Bauer Outage merchandise. We got headbands, we got hoodies, we got shirts, and we have a lot more coming very, very soon. So go on over to TrevorBauer.com today and get yourself some merch. And just a quick word, I wanted to say, if you've ever been bullied, if you've ever felt down about yourself or questioned if things are gonna get better, I've been there, okay? I've been there. And just like you're going to, I found a way to get through it. So if you ever need a confidence boost, if you ever need a pick-me-up, or just to feel like someone's there with you by your side, throw on the Bauer Outage B and know that I'm right there with you and you got this. Well, it's been a while since I have done one of these, but my introverts on Discord need some of their mechanics broken down, some advice given to them. So let's break some of these down, all right? I've got 3 different mechanics that I'm gonna break down today. All of you struggle with rotation of the hips and separation with the hips and the shoulders. So we're gonna start off breaking down Max Scherzer because he rotates extremely well and separates the shoulders and the hips very well. So let's check out what he does and how he does it, and then we'll get to you guys. All right, let's play this through. This is Max Scherzer. You guys have all seen Max throw before. Let's break down the steps of the delivery, the 8 steps: drift, drop, rotate, block, separate, load, spiral, and throw. Let's break it down. All right, here's the drift. See how little the hips are moving forward? So here is the hip line. That's the bad color. Let's choose green. Here's the hip line. As he's lifting the leg, there's a little bit of a drift forward, but not too much. He then goes into the definitive drop right there. Then he goes into the hips get level right here. Then his hips can rotate. There's the rotation. See how this back knee turns down? All right, this hip opens up. That's exactly what we want to see. Boom, right into landing, which is right there. You can see this shoulder line. The hips are opening up, but this shoulder, this elbow I should say, is pinned back, which is pinning this shoulder back. This elbow is going back this way. All right, that's all part of it. This is the separation. The phase, we get the block. You can see the angle of the leg at landing stays basically the exact same. Obviously straightens a little bit as he comes over it. Now it's not driving his body backwards. His body is driving forward over the leg, but the leg is super firm. So the drift, drop, rotate, block is done perfectly. The separation phase, this elbow and the shoulder is going back while this hip is rotating forward. Perfectly timed. This is all pinned back when this is down and blocking. Perfect separation. Load. Both of these are loading back, and the glove side is not blocking the torso from rotating. Spiral. Here comes the elbow. Spirals there, and then the continuation of this torso. Here's the line there. Torso continues forward there. Torso continues forward there. Now obviously the camera's moving a little bit, so it would look like this if the camera was stationary, where the torso is continuing to flex forward. The torso is continuing to rotate around this glove side. All right, that is the throw portion of it. And then obviously you have this deceleration, and that's going to be natural to whoever is doing it. All right, so that is what a really elite set of big league mechanics look like, hitting every single one of the steps. Now obviously he doesn't look like Jacob deGrom or Walker Buehler or Aroldis Chapman or whatever else. They all have their individual styles, but the principles, the 8 principles are the same. All right, let's break down some of your mechanics. Let's check this out. Let's play this one through. Okay, let's break this down. Here's our drift. We got a good drift, so we'll give it a pass on the drift. How's the drop? Okay, but not as much of a drop as we saw with Max, right? This hip is kind of coming forward. It's not really going down and around like this. The center of mass, I should say. You should see the center of mass kind of like drop down and follow that type of a path, okay? Kind of just going out, and you can see this hip line is still elevated. So the hips are not going to be able to rotate until that hip line gets to level, which happens about there. But we're way too far gone. We've run so far down the mound that our backside is completely disengaged. You can see here we're barely even on the toe on this backside. It's just getting kind of drug off the mound right there. So we don't really get any rotation. And then we get that right there. We can see that front knee really collapse. And then everything from there just becomes a push. The hip and the shoulder go at the exact same time. And then everything is just pushing forward. You can see there's stopping of rotation here in the torso. Okay, so that just all becomes very linear. Just to break it down here a little bit more, go a little bit further, the shoulder-hip separation, not really there because the hip hasn't rotated on time. The load phase, decent. I'd like to see a little bit more on this glove side, perhaps, but that's so far down the chain. There's some things that happened before that are just going to help clean this up if we get better at rotating. The spiral is actually really good. You can see that arm tuck inside right here. Then the elbow is going to flip and lead, and we end up in that position. And then the throw phase, we do want to continue with our torso forward. The only problem is it's straight forward, it's not rotating and going forward, so there's some problems in the throw phase here as well. How do we fix it? Well, let's go back here. First thing we see is we're kind of elevating these hips. It looks like we're trying to stay closed with the front side, pelvic load a little bit, something like that. We need to get these hips level earlier than they are. We're kind of riding these hips out, and the backside can't do anything until right about there where the hips get level, but again, it's too late, and we're already getting into front foot plant. So let's get the hips level when you're riding out, and let's see more of a drop phase, okay? We got to get your body lower. It doesn't look like you weigh a ton. I don't know exactly how tall or how much you weigh, how tall you are, how much you weigh, but adding some strength in your legs is going to help. Adding some mass is going to help with this momentum into foot plant to create a higher ceiling of energy, to transfer more to the ball, to throw harder, et cetera, et cetera. But the two things I would say to work on are, let's get rid of this elevated hip line right here. Let's get this front hip to drop down so that the back hip and the front hip are level. And let's get the center of mass to drop more. Let's get into this back leg a little bit more. That's another area that strength is going to help you in, because if you get into that back leg, or in order to get into that back leg, you have to have the strength to get into it. If you aren't strong enough to hold a single leg squat back there, it's going to be really hard to get that depth. And that's really what sets up the hip rotation, leading everything down into foot plant, into separation, into the throw, as we saw with Max, with this very dramatic dropping of the center of mass. So that would be my recommendation to you. Let's go on to the next one. All right, so we got a Lowe's bucket and a shed. This is really cool. Love this mound in the backyard. I may have actually looked at this delivery before, or this kid's delivery before. I'm not exactly sure, I don't remember. But one tip that you can do, you can get some skateboard tape. If anyone has a wood mound out there and you struggle, as you'll see in this video, he slips a little bit on the front foot, get some skateboard tape and just tape that stuff down where you land. It's got a lot of grip to it, and your shoe will stick a lot better on that. It's pretty cheap. You can get on Amazon, maybe 15 bucks for a roll or something like that. Put that down, and then you won't have slipping problems. So let's play this delivery through. Okay, and let's look at this thing in slow motion. So first thing is, how is our drift? Well, we can already see as the leg is swinging up, we have a nice little line right here on the shed, and we can see the drift. Now, I'm going to go ahead and say that this drift could be a little bit too aggressive. We're going to see how it plays out, but caution on this one. This might be what it's like to go too fast, where you're not going to be able to get into the back leg and actually get that rotation and the timing, but we will see. So drift. Now we're going to go into a drop phase. There's not a whole lot of a drop phase. You can see there's a little bit of it right here. We're trying to get into that back leg, but this is kind of like The back leg's here, and we're kind of just hinging forward as opposed to like, I can't bend my pencil. As opposed to like, we're like hinging forward as opposed to like dropping into that back leg and using that to like move us forward, if that makes sense. So the back leg is kind of going to be doing this as opposed to doing here to there to, whoops, to here where we're getting that like dropping down as opposed to just like hinging forward, if that makes sense. Hopefully you guys understand that. So the drop phase not really there. How about our rotation? It looks pretty good. It looks pretty good, but this is why I was concerned a little bit about the drift phase being a little bit too aggressive. This back hip is just a little dead. It's being pulled off. So the hip wants to go. You can see this knee coming down. You can see the hip wanting to go, but we only get a little bit of a turn out of the hip. Now, if you look at this, like that's fully rotated. So you can see how much of the side of the pocket, how much of the Nike swoosh we can see, okay? At landing though, right there, you see how little of that side of the hip we see. So this is a case to me where you're moving so fast down the mound that you're kind of disengaging that backside before you can really get that hip to activate. You're pulling that backside off the rubber, okay, into foot plant, and it looks like you're getting good rotation, but it's just kind of being pulled into rotation as opposed to driving your hips open into rotation. And that's why we're not getting a ton of hip rotation here at landing. How's our block phase? Well, you can see this foot right here. This is what I was talking about with the slip. So we land, and then that foot's gonna slip forward. So hard to say, hard to dock you on the block because you slipped. But if I am gonna look at it, that front leg does pretty good job actually, and it does try to then drive back. So we'll give the block phase good marks. I think that if you were to get the hip open into foot plant a little bit more like we were talking about, that block phase would be really good. How's the separation phase? Well, the hip is going right here. This is really the first, like, that's where the hip really turns. And you can see that the shoulder, this hip, this shoulder, they go at the same time. Watch this, okay? There. There. All right, and that's, let's just really quickly go back to max. Let's look at this here. Look at the hip right there. Hip goes, but the shoulder hasn't gone yet. You see the difference? Hip is opening, shoulder is still back. Now the next frame is when the shoulder goes, okay? But the hip turned right here before the shoulder turned. Okay, now if we go back to your delivery, we can see hip and shoulder at the same time. Okay, so separation phase could use a little bit of work. How's our loading phase? Well, glove side, good on the load. Might be opening the torso a little bit early, actually. So I think a little bit of more early hip rotation will force this torso to stay back a little bit. The body likes to work opposite. So if we get that hip to rotate earlier, the torso probably stays closed a little bit longer. And this arm is a little bit low for me. We're kind of stretching like this, and we're stretching this pec as opposed to kind of loading this way and then letting the arm spiral up. And you can kind of see that here where this arm's just kind of getting drugged through. There's not really this whole here to fold in to the elbow leads and then the arm deploys. This arm just kind of getting drugged through as one piece, which isn't the best we could hope for. And then the torso actually does continue to try to rotate and flex forward. So the delivery, the throw portion of it, I'll give pretty good marks to. It'll clean up if we clean up some of the other stuff before that. So how do we fix it? Let's slow down the drift a little bit and focus more on the drop into this back leg, and that should set you up where that hip can actually rotate as opposed to being pulled off the mound. And if you guys have watched any of these videos before, you'll notice I say a lot of the same things, and that's because if you fix what's going on at the beginning of the delivery, the other stuff at the end doesn't matter as much because it all cleans up. If you try to fix the stuff at the end of the delivery, it's going to be really hard to force it because your body's not in a position and hasn't gone through the sequence of events to make that a natural thing to have happen. So you're fighting against what your body wants to do. So, all right, we got one more. Let's look at this. Oh, this looks like we're in, I mean, man, we could be in, is it Puerto Rico? Is it Latin country of some sort? Just the stands, the yellow colors. Not sure exactly where this is, but this is cool. We got a high quality video from all over the world, actually. It's amazing what we can get these days. This type of video for me was coming up would be really hard to actually access and to get. Now it's just on a smartphone. So let's play this through real quick. Okay. Let's take a look at the finer details. Let's look here. How's our drift? We got a little bit of a drift going on here. Okay. Not a ton, but we do see a little bit of a drift. So might be a little bit too little, but we'll see how the rest of the delivery plays out. So I'll give this a pass. How's our drop? Okay, this is what a good kind of definitive drop looks like. You can see his center of mass is like, let's call it there, and then his center of mass is going to be down here. So you can see this dropping action, and then the center of mass is going to be here, and so you can see this kind of profile that I was talking about earlier with the center of mass, as opposed to this profile where the back leg is kind of straight and you're just going down the mountain like that. Okay, drop phase, good. How's our rotation phase? Lacking. We land, and the hips don't get fully rotated until right about there after the ball is released. How's the block? Block's really good, actually. Looks like a strong kid. Very good block right here. You can see this angle. Bam. No bracing of the knee forward. The knee does not move forward at all, and it actually straightens. So we'll give the drift and the drop good marks. The rotation, a little lacking. The block is good. How's our separation? Well, if we don't have good rotation, our separation is probably not going to be the best. And you can see this torso this is open. This is open early. It's a terrible arrow, Trevor. Whatever. Torso is now forward. So very limited separation here. That's going to limit our ability to load the glove side. This glove side's not really loading. It's just kind of floating down there. The arm action actually loads pretty well. In a pretty good spot there. Spiral is okay. Actually, spiral's pretty darn good. Pretty darn good. And the throw is good because we have this forward flexion of the torso, but the rotational piece isn't there. So we could definitely use some cleaning up of that. Where do we start? Well, let's go back to the first thing that breaks here, which is the rotation. Get into a pretty good spot. Let's get this hip open. And how we're going to do that is try to get rid of this elevated hip line, okay? We're here, we're level. Now we're going to push this hip forward, which is going to elevate this front side. Okay, now the hips cannot rotate until you get back to level, which happens right about here. Now you can see we're back to level across the hips there. And our knee wants to go, but we're so far down the mound already that it's hard. So we just end up pushing forward. Instead of this hip dropping down and around, this hip just kind of slides forward and then pops up. Okay, watch this. Slide and then elevate. See this back hip elevate right there? Front hip is probably somewhere here, back hip is somewhere there, higher than the front hip. Okay, ideally we'd see this opposite. We would see this, the hip here, and this side hip a little bit lower. Let's go back to Scherzer. Let's take a look. See how this hip goes down right here and then this hip's gonna fire this way, bang. See it going down? That's gonna lead to closing off of the hips and the rotation right here. There it is, the hip goes down, 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 and it's at least level, if not slightly, where the right hip is slightly lower than the left hip. Okay, let's go back to our delivery here. What happens? That hip pops up. When this hip pops up, it shifts the torso forward because that's the only way. Your hips are here, your torso's here. If this hip pops up, your torso goes forward. If the other hip pops up, your torso goes back because your torso is locked in with your hips. So as soon as this back hip pops up, the torso has to shift forward. Here, we're in a really good spot right here. If this hip goes down, the torso stays stacked. If this hip goes up, the torso tilts forward. What does the hip do? Goes up. Torso tilts forward, front shoulder opens up. This is now just trying to hang on because if it pulls anymore, you're gonna just fall over on this other side to your left, and then that disrupts the rest of the throw, okay? How do we fix it? Well, that's what we were talking about. Let's get these hips, let's stay out of this position here if we can. Drop that front hip. Get this front hip level with this back hip. This needs to drop down in your drop phase. So when you're going drift, right here, sink this front hip down. Down, down, down with that front hip. Don't let it elevate. And that'll put you in a position where this back knee wants to go. It wants to rotate. You can see this. It's going there. It wants to rotate, but the hips aren't level until there, and then it just doesn't have the time to actually do it. So that's what I would recommend on that front. All three of you guys have a little bit of an issue with rotation. All of you have a slightly different reason for it, and all of you could benefit from watching the breakdown of Scherzer because he does it extremely well. And without further ado, I hope you guys learned something. If you guys want to join the Discord, I'll leave a link in the description so you can join in and get your mechanics analyzed, and I will see y'all in the next video. Thanks for hanging out.